I remember the exact moment my world cracked, not with thunder, not with sin, but with a sound so small I thought it was my own heartbeat betraying me. It was long before dawn, the house still heavy with sleep, when I woke to a faint humming beneath the floorboards, not the rhythm of our old windmill, not the creak of timber settling in the night. This was sharper, unnatural, as if some invisible insect had crawled into our home and begun gnawing at the darkness. The sound frightened me instantly, though I couldn't have said why. Maybe because anything foreign frightens a child raised on Ordnung, the invisible fence around our lives, our thoughts, our very sense of what is allowed to exist. I slipped from my straw mattress and stepped onto the cold wooden planks. The air tasted of dried hay from the loft, of the soap my mother boiled last Sunday, of the faint smoke that clung to our clothes after the evening lamps were put out. Everything felt normal, except that thin, humming thread stretched through the silence like a warning. I descended the stairs slowly, careful not to wake anyone else. But someone was already awake. My father stood in the kitchen, facing the table, shoulders hunched as though he were hiding from God himself. In his hands he held a small object, dull metal in the weak dawn light. I didn't recognize it. How could I? We were not meant to know such shapes. But I recognized the glow, a cold white point of light, trembling faintly in his palms. I froze, breath snagged in my throat. It was the first electric light I had ever seen. Father turned. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes, not the kind that comes from God's wrath or a poor harvest, but the fear of a man caught between two worlds, both judging him. I didn't understand the device, but I understood the look. A violation, a fracture in the Ordnung, a lie. "You didn't see this," he whispered, voice raw. But I had. And I'd seen more than he meant to show. The secret, the shame, the desperate need he had to hold that forbidden glow, even if only for a moment. I'd heard elders preach my entire childhood that technology was a doorway through which the devil might slip unnoticed. Watching my father clutch that tiny light, I wondered if they had been right. He dropped the thing into his jacket pocket and extinguished the glow, leaving the kitchen in honest, familiar darkness again. But the humming still echoed in me, even when the sound itself died. At breakfast, he acted as if nothing had happened, though his hands trembled, barely noticeable unless you knew the strength they usually carried. Mother sensed something was wrong. Of course she did, but she only prayed longer over the meal. In our world, women feel the storm before men name it, but they are taught to speak to heaven, not to their husbands. I tried to convince myself I had imagined everything, that a lantern wick had sputtered strangely, that my childish mind had given meaning to shadows. But the memory of that cold light gnawed at me, and worse, my father's eyes haunted me more than the device itself. If he could break Ordnung, then perhaps the Ordnung was not as unbreakable as I had always believed. Later that evening, I wandered outside to clear my thoughts. The air smelled of damp earth and the sharp sweetness of cut hay. The horses shifted in their stalls. The sky above the barns was still blue at the edges, melting slowly into the first stars. I wanted to believe the world was simple, as the elders said it was. Yet now everything felt tilted. I found Father sitting on the porch, staring into the dark fields. I sat beside him without speaking, my heart beat wildly, full of questions I did not dare ask. After a long silence, he said quietly, "If you ever see light where it should not be, turn away." He wasn't talking about the device anymore. He was talking about desire, knowledge, curiosity, about the hunger for something beyond the ridges of our farmland. I was supposed to turn away, but when night finally swallowed our homes and the lamps were blown out, I looked out across the fields, and I saw something that made my breath stop. In Elder Yoder's house, far across the pasture, a pale light glimmered behind the window. Too steady, too clean, too white to be fire, the forbidden glow, the same as my father's. And in that instant, I knew the secret didn't belong to him alone. That was the night I understood. The elders were hiding something, and the truth would not stay in the dark for long. I didn't sleep the night I saw the pale glow in Elder Yoder's window. I lay awake listening to the steady breathing of my brothers in the beds beside me, the settling creaks of the farmhouse, the distant lowing of cattle, everything familiar except the memory burning behind my eyes. That cold light did not belong in our world. It didn't flicker like a kerosene flame. It didn't dim or dance. It simply was, steady and self-assured, like the gaze of someone who knows he will not be challenged. Elder Yoder was one of the staunchest defenders of Ordnung. His voice was ironed every sermon, his eyes sharp as a hawk's when he reminded us that the outside was a trap. He'd always said the world beyond our farms was full of illusions pretending to be progress, machines that stole time, electricity that stole humility, devices that stole souls. And yet his window had glowed like a lighthouse guiding sailors to a forbidden shore. By sunrise, my heart felt bruised from beating against the cage of my ribs. I carried water from the pump, fed the horses, swept the barn. Every motion was automatic, my thoughts tangled around that impossible light. I tried to meet Father's eyes during milking, but he avoided my gaze, speaking only when necessary. When I brushed past him, I felt him flinch, as though my knowing had weight. After chores, I made my way to the Yoder's farm, telling myself I would bring back the hymnals Mrs. Yoder had lent my mother. It was a flimsy excuse, but in our community, any errand that smelled of duty excused curiosity. Besides, I needed to see with my own eyes, needed to know whether I had been deceived by the night. The path to their house wound between fields of knee-high corn, the leaves whispering like conspirators. The dew soaked my boots, birds called from the fence posts. Everything around me was peaceful, yet my pulse quickened with each step, as if the earth itself were warning me to turn back. But I had inherited my father's flaw. Whatever part of him had reached for forbidden light that morning now lived in me too. When I reached the Yoder house, it looked ordinary, plain. Against the pale morning sky, its white boards and dark shutters showed no sign of the secret I had glimpsed. Mrs. Yoder greeted me with her usual gentle smile. Nothing unusual there either. She handed me the hymnals, thanked me for the help with their harvest last week, asked politely about my mother's rheumatism. Not a flicker of guilt crossed her face. But then I saw it. On the table inside the doorway, half hidden beneath a folded cloth, a black wire protruding from a cracked wooden drawer, a wire that had no place in an Amish home. My stomach tightened. Mrs. Yoder noticed my glance and, in an instant, her expression changed. Not dramatically, just a tightening around her eyes, a stiffening in the set of her shoulders. But it was enough. I knew she knew what I'd seen. She reached out and pushed the cloth further over the drawer. "Best get home before the sun climbs," she said softly. "Your father will have need of you." Her voice held a subtle pressure, gentle but unmistakable, a warning disguised as hospitality. I stepped outside, heart thudding. As the door closed behind me, I felt the breath of danger at my back. For the first time in my life, I realized the elders' authority wasn't as pure or as transparent as they claimed. They spoke of Ordnung as if it were handed down by God himself. They never admitted it was also written by human hands, hands capable of secrets, of fear, of hypocrisy. On the walk home, I kept glancing over my shoulder. The corn rustled louder now, as if whispering my name. I imagined Elder Yoder standing in his doorway, watching me leave, calculating what I might be thinking, what I might say. By the time I reached our fields, Father was already in the barn, chopping wood. When he saw me, he paused mid-swing, the axe hanging suspended, his expression unreadable. "You went to Yoder's," he said, not a question. "Yes," I answered. "Did you see anything?" The words hit me like a stone. He wasn't asking as a father, he was asking like a man afraid his own sins might be reflected elsewhere. I hesitated, my mouth felt dry. I saw nothing, I lied. Father exhaled, too quickly, too heavily, and resumed chopping. The relief on his face frightened me more than any forbidden object could. If even he feared the truth, then the truth was far more dangerous than I understood. That night the elders gathered for a meeting. Their buggies lined the lane like silent black sentinels. Father left without explanation. Mother lit no lamps. We children were sent to bed early. Through the thin walls I heard muffled voices carried from the barn where the elders met, low, urgent, taut like rope pulled too tight. I pressed my ear to the window frame and caught only fragments. Temptation, straying from the path, must be dealt with. I didn't know if they were discussing my father, or Yoder, or someone else entirely, but I knew the light in the window had consequences far larger than a single broken rule. Much later, when the buggies finally departed and silence settled over the farm, Father returned. He looked pale, older somehow. He sat at the table with his head in his hands. I approached quietly. "Father," I whispered, "what's happening?" He lifted his eyes, and in them I saw a fear deeper than the one he'd shown that morning with the device. It was the fear of a man who has glimpsed a truth he cannot unsee. "We're not the only ones," he murmured, "and soon someone will be found out." I felt the hair on my arms rise. "Found out for what?" I asked. He opened his mouth to answer. But then, from outside, a sharp knock rattled the door, so sudden and forceful that both of us flinched. The knocking did not sound like anything I'd ever heard in our quiet valley. It wasn't polite, or hesitant, or gentle the way Amish men usually announce themselves. It was hard, deliberate. 3 heavy blows that made the lantern on our table tremble. My father's face went still, the way a hunted animal freezes before it decides whether to flee or surrender. I felt my mouth go dry as he rose from his chair. "Stay here," he said, though his voice betrayed the truth. He didn't expect me to listen. He walked toward the door with the slow, steady steps of a man approaching judgment. I followed anyway, my bare feet silent on the wooden floor. The house seemed to hold its breath around us. Even the ticking of the kitchen clock felt strangely loud. When Father opened the door, the cold night poured in, carrying with it the muted scent of soil and manure from the fields. Lanterns glowed outside, their soft flames illuminating the faces of the elders, stern, shadowed, carved with years of discipline and suspicion. Elder Yoder stood among them. His presence hit me like a blow. He was the one Father had feared. He was the one whose window had glowed unnaturally the night before, yet here he was, face grave, expression composed, wrapped in authority, as if nothing about him were amiss. "Brother Eli," he said to my father, "we need to speak with you." Father dipped his head. "Of course." Another elder, tall with a beard the color of wet ash, shifted his lantern, and its light spilled over into our home. Mother had come from the bedroom, shawl tight around her shoulders, eyes wide but obediently calm. Behind her, my younger brothers peeked out, half asleep, sensing danger but not understanding it. "This will not take long," Elder Yoder said, "but it must be done in private." Private. In Amish terms, that meant serious. Too serious for children's ears, too serious for women's whispers. My stomach twisted, but Father did something unexpected. He glanced at me, a small glance, barely more than a flicker, but in that moment I understood he no longer trusted the privacy they demanded. He took a slow breath, squared his shoulders, and said, "My son stays." A ripple passed through the elders. Surprise, annoyance, something darker beneath. But Yoder merely tightened his jaw. "Very well," he said, "but he listens as a witness, not as a participant." They stepped inside. Our tiny kitchen felt even smaller, crowded with authority and tension. Mother stood near the stove, hands clasped, lips moving soundlessly. A prayer, I'm sure. The elders formed a half-circle around my father, lanterns held high, shadows stretching across the walls like judgment itself. It was Elder Hochstetler, the man with the ash-colored beard, who spoke first. "There have been concerns," he began. Concerns that certain members of our district have allowed foreign influence to seep into their households, influence that threatens our unity and obedience to Ordnung. My father did not blink. Who has made such accusations? Yoder answered this time. We do not speak of accusations. We speak of observations. Observations. The word slithered into the room like a serpent. Observations meant someone had seen something. Someone had been watched. Someone was suspected. I felt the humming memory of that forbidden device vibrating in my bones. Father asked quietly, "And you suspect me?" The elders exchanged glances thick with unspoken conclusions. "We suspect," Hochstetler said, "that temptation may have come too close to your family, and temptation is a crack through which the outside slips." My breath caught. Father stood tall, but I saw the faint tightening in his jaw, the tension in his hands. "And what of the light in Yoder's window?" I blurted before I could stop myself. The room froze. The silence was immediate and suffocating. Mother gasped softly. My father turned his head sharply, eyes wide with warning. But it was too late. Yoder stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then he took a slow step forward. "What light do you speak of, boy?" he asked, voice low, controlled. Father stepped between us instantly. He speaks from imagination, a child's mind, nothing more. But I knew Yoder did not believe that. His eyes stayed locked on mine, searching, calculating. I felt exposed, like he could see the precise moment I'd watched the glow through his shutter. Hochstetler cleared his throat. "This meeting is about your household, Eli, not about distracting tales." Father's voice was, "Then speak plainly." And they did. They spoke of temptation, of drift, of the slow erosion of obedience. They asked questions coded in politeness, but sharpened with suspicion. They wanted to know if Father had been struggling, if he harbored doubts, if he was involved with anyone outside the community, if any objects of the English world had found their way into our home. My heart hammered. Father answered every question carefully, his voice steady, but I felt the heat of the truth burning beneath each word. Finally, the elders concluded their interrogation. Hochstetler gave one last warning. If anything unusual is found, anything that does not belong, there will be consequences. Their lanterns flickered as they filed out, but Yoder lingered in the doorway. His eyes flicked to my father, then to me, then back to the darkness beyond the porch. When he finally stepped into the night, he murmured just loud enough for us to hear. Secrets have a way of calling attention to themselves. The door closed. Silence returned. But something in my father broke. He sank into a chair, head in his hands. Not in fear, not exactly, but in exhaustion. Mother knelt beside him, whispering reassurance. I stood frozen. Because in all the chaos, only one thing mattered. The elders weren't here by chance. They weren't reacting to a rumor. They were searching, and if they were searching, I hardly slept after the elders left. Their lantern glow seemed to linger in the corners of the house, even after they'd ridden away. My father sat at the table long after midnight, fingers pressed against his temples like he was holding his skull together. Mother quietly cleared dishes around him, her movements slow and deliberate, as if loud sounds might shatter what little strength he had left. I lay awake thinking of Elder Yoder's final words. Secrets have a way of calling attention to themselves. He hadn't said it as a threat. He'd said it as a certainty, like he already knew exactly which secret he was waiting for. By dawn, the tension in our home felt like a knot tied too tightly. Father left early to check on the cattle, moving stiffly like his boots were filled with stones. Mother had us children start chores immediately, her voice softer than usual but edged with quiet urgency. As I carried water from the pump, I felt someone watching me. The hairs on my neck prickled. When I turned, I saw a familiar figure walking down the lane toward our gate. My cousin Amos. Amos was the same age as me, but always seemed younger somehow. He had a way of drifting behind the rest of us, observing, listening, absorbing everything like a sponge. He never caused trouble, but he always seemed to know more than he was supposed to. Father once said Amos had a dangerous quietness, not rebellion, but the kind of silence that collects secrets like dust in a corner. He reached me and offered a weak smile. "Heard the elders came late last night," he said, his voice low. "Word travels fast. In a small district, it always does." He kicked at the dirt with his boot, glancing toward our house. Something flickered across his face, guilt, maybe, or fear. It was hard to tell. I remembered the elders' certainty, their targeted questions, the way they had come straight to our door. "Amos," I asked slowly, "did you say something to them?" His eyes widened. "What? No, I mean, why would I? You tell me." For a moment, only the rustling of the fields answered us. His lips parted as if he were about to confess, but then he shut them quickly, pressing them into a thin line. He shook his head. "You shouldn't accuse people without proof," he muttered. "It isn't right." Then he turned and walked away, too quickly, too stiffly, not like someone offended, like someone escaping. My stomach twisted. Amos had been at our house the day before the elders came. He'd fetched a tool from our barn. He'd lingered in the doorway, and he'd seen Father go inside right after hiding the forbidden object. Had he heard something? Seen something? Or worse, had he guessed? All morning my thoughts chased themselves into tighter circles. The field seemed quieter, the sky heavier. Every passing buggy made me flinch, expecting elders to return, this time to search the house. At midday, Father called me to the barn. He was repairing a broken yoke, his hands moving mechanically. "You spoke out of turn last night," he said without looking up, mentioning Yoder's window. "That was dangerous." "I know," I whispered. "You must be careful. There are things you don't understand yet." I swallowed hard, then explained them to me. He stopped working, his breath halting. The barn felt suddenly colder. "I can't," he said. "Not yet. Not yet." The words tasted like a locked door. I was about to press him when the barn door creaked open. Mother stood there, face pale, apron twisted nervously in her hands. "Eli," she said quietly to Father, "you should come inside." "What's wrong? There's someone here to see you." My father's shoulders stiffened. He exchanged a quick glance with me, one filled with dread, and followed her into the house. I stayed in the barn a moment, trying to steady myself. The cows shifted uneasily, as if sensing the tension. A mockingbird called from the rafters, but the pit in my stomach only grew. Finally, I stepped outside and walked toward the house. The moment I entered the kitchen, my breath caught. Sitting at our table was Elder Hochstetler, and beside him, Amos. My cousin wouldn't meet my eyes. His hands were clasped tightly in his lap, knuckles white. Hochstetler's face was calm, but his presence filled the room like a storm cloud. "Sit down," he said. Father stood opposite them, jaw clenched. Mother hovered in the doorway, trying to appear busy while watching every move. I sat. Hochstetler folded his hands. "Your cousin has come forward with information." I looked at Amos. He stared at the floor. My pulse roared in my ears. "What information?" I asked. Father shot me a warning look, but Hochstetler answered anyway. "He tells us there have been unusual noises coming from your home, a humming, late at night." Amos flinched, and he says, Hochstetler continued, "that he believes your father may have acquired something inappropriate, something from the English." The room spun. My father whispered, "Amos, why?" But Amos only shook his head slowly, tears gathering in his eyes. "I thought it was the right thing," he whispered. "I thought we were supposed to report temptations. I didn't want anyone to get hurt." He wasn't lying out of malice. He was lying out of fear, fear planted by the elders, fear sharpened by Ordnung. Hochstetler turned his gaze to my father. "We will need to search the property." Mother gasped. Father stepped forward. "That is not necessary." "It is," Hochstetler said simply, "and we will begin with the house." I rose to my feet before I realized what I was doing. "You can't just—" Hochstetler's eyes snapped to me, cold and stern. "Sit down, boy." Father's hand tightened on my shoulder. "Do as he says." My heartbeat hammered against my ribs like fists against a door. Outside, I heard buggy wheels crunching gravel, more elders coming to search everything, and I realized with sudden icy clarity, they weren't just looking for a forbidden object. They were looking for the truth my father had tried to hide, and if they found it, none of us would be safe. The elders fanned out across our yard like a quiet army. Their buggies lined the lane, lanterns hanging from the posts like suspended moons. No one spoke. Not the horses, not the elders, not even the wind. It was the sort of silence that happens before a field is burned, heavy, decisive, waiting only for the first spark. My father stood in the doorway as they approached the house, his face carved from something hard and ancient. Mother clutched the edge of her apron, her knuckles pale. Amos remained at the table, head bowed, trembling, perhaps realizing too late what he had set in motion. Elder Hochstetler stepped forward. "We will begin inside. You may accompany us, Eli." "Of course," Father said, but his voice held a stiffness that even the elders noticed. The search began in the kitchen. Drawers were pulled open, bread tins lifted, floorboards tapped for hollows. The elders worked with the cold efficiency of men who had done this before, men who had practiced rooting out transgression. I followed them into Father's room next, my heart thudding. They sifted through his clothes, inspected the pockets of his coats, lifted the mattress, checked the baseboards. Every second felt like a tightening of rope. Nothing. They moved to the children's room, searched our toys, our wooden chests, even the cracks behind the water basin. Nothing. But I knew that Father had hidden the device somewhere, a place he thought safe, a place none of us would dare to look. The elders filed out and headed toward the last room, my parents' storage room, where we kept old tools, quilt scraps, and salted meat. It always smelled of cedar and faint mildew. When they opened the door, the scent rushed out, damp and earthy. My father's jaw tightened ever so slightly. Hochstetler noticed. He stepped inside first. The elders spread out, lifting crates, moving sacks of grain, examining old shelves built before I was born. I watched my father watching them. Every shift of his eyes was a map of worry he was trying to hide. That's when Elder Yoder approached a wooden chest in the corner, the one my father almost never touched, the one he kept locked, except today, the lock was gone. My breath caught. Father's hand twitched toward the chest, but he forced it back to his side. Yoder lifted the lid. Inside were only blankets, or so it seemed. He dug deeper, and then he paused. His fingers curled around something metallic. For one awful moment, time froze, but when he pulled the object up, it wasn't the device. It was a rusty hand drill, old, harmless, worn smooth with age. Father exhaled so softly, I barely heard it. Yoder let the blankets fall back into place. "Nothing," he said. Hochstetler nodded. "We continue outside." As they moved out of the house, Father went rigid, not with fear, but with a silent realization. They hadn't found it. They would. Because the barn was next. The barn, his workshop. The barn, where he spent long mornings and late evenings. The barn, where he could hide anything among tools and feed and hay. I walked beside him as we followed the elders across the yard. His voice was a whisper. "You must not say a word. Do you understand?" My mouth was too dry to speak, but I nodded. The barn doors groaned open. Dust motes drifted through shafts of light. The elders entered slowly, lanterns raised, faces set like stone. They began with the tool racks, examined every chisel, every plane, every nail jar. They opened feed bins, prodded the hayloft, checked the grain barrels for false bottoms. Still nothing. But Hochstetler was patient, too patient. He turned to Father. "Where do you keep your personal tools?" Father hesitated. "On the workbench. No other place?" Silence. "There is a cabinet," Father admitted. The elders approached it. The cabinet stood against the far wall, a heavy oak thing with iron hinges. I had seen Father lock it many times. He always kept the key on a leather cord around his belt. Today, the cord was missing. My blood turned cold. Hochstetler pulled the cabinet door. It opened smoothly. The elders leaned in, shelves lined with wooden boxes, oilcloths, bundles of twine. Nothing unusual. But then Joder pointed. "What's that?" A small wooden casing tucked behind a lantern wick tin. My father stepped forward. "Just a spare." "Move aside," Hochstetler said. Father obeyed. Hochstetler reached in, pulled the box forward, and opened the lid. Inside, wrapped carefully in wool, was a metal object, small, compact, familiar. My heart slammed against my ribs. The forbidden light. Father didn't breathe. The elders stared at it, their faces darkening with something between anger and triumph. They had found what they wanted, not just the device, but the proof, the confession without words. Joder held out his hand. "Give it to me." But Hochstetler didn't move. He stared at the device, fascinated in a way he tried to hide. "This," he said slowly, "does not belong here. You know that, Eli." My father's shoulders sagged, not in defeat, but in something heavier. Resignation. "I know," he said. Mother had appeared at the barn door, her face a mask of fear and heartbreak. Hochstetler continued. "You understand the consequences?" Father nodded once, a single heavy motion. Amos stepped forward, pale, horrified. "Uncle Eli, I didn't think." But Hochstetler raised a hand sharply. "This matter is no longer yours, Amos." Father closed his eyes. I thought he might break. Instead, he straightened, and for the first time, he looked relieved, as if a terrible weight had finally been taken from him. "Take me if you must," he said quietly, "but leave my family out of this." The elders exchanged glances. Yoda spoke. "We will deliberate. You will be informed of our decision tomorrow." They closed the box, wrapped the device again, and stepped out of the barn. Father watched them leave with an expression I didn't understand. Not despair, not fear. Something closer to acceptance or surrender. I went to him. "Father, what happens now?" He placed a trembling hand on my shoulder. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "they'll decide my fate." I swallowed hard. "And what will they decide?" He looked toward the dark line of trees at the edge of our property, the place where our world ended and the outside began. "That depends," he said, voice unsteady, "on whether they believe I acted alone." I stared at him. "Did you?" I asked. His answer chilled me. "No," he whispered. "And before this is over, you'll see who else carries forbidden."